You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our super generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by, that's right, every Wookiee's favorite right-hand man. This is Han Solo. This week, some Christmas cheer is coming our way as well. I really hope everyone enjoyed last Monday's high-speed rail flashback. We'll do more of those going forward and bring back some favorites from the back catalog. Really glad to share that episode with folks, or those two episodes, I should say. I actually scrunched them back together into one. And so that nowadays, I guess I go to 45, 50, 55, maybe sometimes an hour episode. And at the time I was like, well, anything over 30 minutes is too much. So we are combining those two and then sharing them as well. Hopefully there's a couple more episodes like that where we can combine them into one so that they aren't disconnected and people can listen to them all the way through. So hopefully the folks like that one. We're going to do more in the future, probably not next week, but the week after will be another Monday show after New Year's. And then we'll probably start up, sharing some more episodes, older episodes, and we're looking forward to that. Yeah, so as we do when we're Han Solo, we've got some great episodes coming up. We're going to share with you the ones that we're recorded already and the ones that we're thinking of. This week, we'll be releasing our third conversation with Congressman Earl Blumenauer, fresh off of his announcement that he won't be running for another congressional term. But he says he has a lot more work to do at home, and so we're going to talk to him a little bit about that. This week of Christmas, actually the week of Christmas, I should say, we swapped episodes with Paul Comfort in the podcast Transit Unplugged. Paul will chat with WMATA CEO Randy Clark about a whole host of issues. And in the new year, we have a lot of good episodes planned, including an episode with Dr. Shima Hamidi and her team's research on lane widths and traffic safety, which this study is huge and groundbreaking. And I mentioned it last time. We had just recorded it last Mondays when we came out. So looking forward to sharing that episode with you all. It should be out in the first or second week of January, and exciting research on that. Also, we just recorded that episode with John King of the SF Chronicle in front of a live audience at MTC, courtesy of the Bay Area Regional Collaborative. I'm really looking forward to sharing that one with folks too, because it was a really interesting discussion. John wrote a really great book and fun, easy read, really interesting. And if you're a San Francisco history buff, it's a good addition to the action. So looking forward to hearing, if folks get a chance to read it and let me know what you think, because I thought it was a really fun and interesting look back at the ferry building overall and the history of it. I think we'll be doing more of these live shows at MTC, hopefully going forward, and probably have some related happy hours. This one was just kind of like the first time we were doing something like that. And so I think we figured a couple things out and we know what we want to do going forward. So just stay tuned for those announcements. We'll probably have some fun and interesting talks back at MTC, hopefully in the future. And finally, I'm so sad about this, but I have been working on the Kingwood Greenbelt episode. I do have all that information, but I still haven't gotten to it yet. Just life gets in the way sometimes of doing some of those things. So we're still working on it. I just need to make it a priority, which it hasn't been because I've been so busy with some other stuff. So hopefully I'll get to that as well. And then also I've got a stack of books on my desk and I've been chatting with folks to get them on the show. So hopefully we'll have some good topics in the future. We'll have hopefully some topics like skateboarding. We'll have talk about mayors. We'll talk about how we plan cities for optimal transportation and much, much more. So we'll get some good episodes in there coming in the new year. And I'm looking forward to talking with folks and recording them and then sharing them with you. I'm looking at my spreadsheet of ideas right now, and I'm on line like 202. So there's still a ton to talk about. I know I have like 10 to 15 really good ideas that are in my mind of episodes that I want to do. So really looking forward to coming the new year with those. So yeah, lots of great episodes coming up. I hope you all enjoy them. I hope you've enjoyed those episodes that have come out this year. We just released one of the Impact plenaries. That was really great. Christopher Coase of DOT did a really great job of moderating a group of folks talking about downtowns. Go check that one out if you get a chance. There's lots of really great lines in there from Karen Chappell and some others. So definitely go back and listen to last Thursday's episode as well. Well, I just want to say also thanks for everyone who's been ordering Bus and Bike scarves. You guys have been awesome. We just keep on having to get out the door and put them in the mail almost every day this last week. So we're really happy about that. And we've had a flurry of orders because I guess it's getting close to Christmas. And I've also been advertising them on Twitter and Threads and Mastodon and other places like that. So if you'd like to order one, you can go to theoverheadwire.com. And if you want more than 5, again, we'll give you the 25% off discount for Monday's listeners if you want to order more than 5 or more. And also, if you want to order them by Christmas for a gift for a friend or a colleague or anything like that, hit me up today or tomorrow, Monday the 18th or Tuesday the 19th of December, and we'll try really hard to get you them by Saturday. Email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com and we'll make that happen, or order one and we'll try to get them to you as fast as we possibly can. And we really appreciate it. We really appreciate everybody who supports the show by listening to the show, by supporting on Patreon, by getting the scarves, ordering the Carbs or Cholesterol t-shirts, the bookshop site. People have been ordering books, so I really appreciate that. And also you can subscribe to the newsletter. Just being a subscriber, even if you're not a paid subscriber, helps out as well because we can send to more people, and that's really good. So many ways to support the show, and we really appreciate all of them. And thanks for listening to the ads, and thanks for listening to me babble on through all these so we can get to the good stuff, which is what you all are looking for, the news. And yeah, don't forget to order any of the books we've covered on the site. I know there's been a bunch of really good books this year that we've covered on our bookshop site. So bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. Order those coming up. Also, the Carbs or Cholesterol t-shirt, stickers, and all that stuff has been going as well. So folks have been really enjoying that. bit.ly/Carbs or Cholesterol if you want to get one of those. And also all this stuff's in the show notes. So if I talk too fast or or you missed it and think about going back, it's in the show notes and on the page of theoverheadwire.com where we keep our blog and where we post the notes from these episodes, because we keep a good show notes. We post all the links to the articles we talk about, and we share those with you all because I know that some folks want to go deeper in and have a deeper dive than just the stuff that we talk about on the 30,000 foot level. So go check out the show notes if you get a chance. This is episode 145. We're live and in session. We're really thankful that you're here at the week before Christmas. And again, before we get to the show, we want to let folks know that they can get this podcast on Talking Headways and Mondays at the Red Wire. You can get it on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Apple Podcasts. Anywhere you find your podcasts, we'll be there. And thanks to everyone who subscribes through podcatchers. I know you're probably actually listening to the show because you're on a podcatcher, because I'm so bad at advertising, but I appreciate you coming back each week and listening. Also, if you feel so inclined, leave us a review on iTunes. Share this with your friends. Tell your buddies about the episode that you listen to here, whether it's this episode or others. I love when I see people asking questions on Twitter about something that was in the episode. I think it was a couple of folks up in Chicago actually talking on Twitter about one of the episodes that we recently did and one of the news items that we shared. So I appreciate that too. Always tag me at the Overhead Wire on Twitter or on Mastodon, at Threads, wherever you are when you're talking about it, LinkedIn, etc. So looking forward to seeing more of that. Appreciate it. Okay, so here's the news. We are going to talk about the news from the last 2 weeks that we've collected and covered at the Overhead Wire newsletter. The newsletter is basically my job, right? So this is what I do for a living. I do the newsletter and the podcast. And the way that we collect news is I go through about 1,500 news items every day, and I pull out the ones that I think are the most interesting in 5 different categories. And then at the end of the week, I pick the best of for the best of email on Fridays. And then those items get put in articles for places like Greater Washington or Urban Milwaukee or Streets.mn, who syndicate our best of at the end of the week. And then we kind of collect those also on the Monday after, and we talk about them in a little more detail. And then I also go back and see which ones I liked that maybe weren't as popular and wanted to talk about a little bit more and share those with you all as well. So if you want to check this out, if you want to check out all the articles we post every day, go to theoverheadwire.com. There's at the top right of the site, you can find subscribe to the Overhead Wire and check it out. All we need is an email. We give you a 2-week free trial. All we need is an email address. And then if you're not interested afterwards, we'll delete it and get rid of it forever from our email address, and you won't have to worry about us. I know that other places, they get your email and they never let it go. I've actually had to start giving money to people who I really, really want to support legislatively, and they're fundraising for the the next election, and they asked me to do Act Blue, and I say, no, I'll send you a check, but I'm not going to do Act Blue because they take my email and they sell it to everybody, which is really annoying. So we try not to replicate that because I know how annoying it is personally. In any event, here's the news. First up, Colorado governor looks for solutions. Colorado Governor Jared Polis is floating the idea to expand and improve transit service across the state and link it to housing and climate action. But the governor also believes the transit agency serving the Denver region, RTD, needs an overhaul before they receive more funding. The agency is running just 70% of 2019 service, and the governor is open to changing the Colorado Department of Transportation's priorities to get more service as well. This was by Nathaniel Miner at Colorado Public Radio. Great job lately, Nathaniel. I really appreciate your articles. You all at Colorado Public Radio are providing a great service and keeping us informed about what's going on at the state house and local levels in Colorado. So Polis used to represent an area near Boulder, apparently, and is still big mad about not getting a rail line in the city from Denver to Boulder. And so I think that's part of why he's still says people don't trust the agency. But also, since the pandemic, they actually reduced bus service to the tune of, and train service to the tune of 70% of what it was offered in 2019, like we just mentioned. And they have a vision for getting more service, but it's only 85% of the service that they offered before the pandemic. So the governor actually wants to see 150 to 200% of where they were in 2019, which I think is a huge amount of service. That's a great number, and I would really love to see that happen. But they're also coming up against a wall with things like the Colorado Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which basically allows the state to spend money each year based on a 2015 cap plus inflation plus population growth. There's a calculation they do for that. And then all of the revenues that they collect must be returned to taxpayers. So I think that much like Prop 13 here in California, there seems like there's a long-term unintended consequences that are going to happen from this. And one of them is a 2025 kind of cliff that I think RTD and some other agencies that funded with help from the state are going to run into. So there's stuff like that happening. And then also, I think that it's a really good that what Colorado's been doing on the DOT front, and they're reprioritizing away from just expanding highways and then focusing on more transportation options for everybody else. I think that that's going to be a big thing going forward, and we're going to watch what Minnesota does. We're going to watch what Colorado does in those areas, because I think they're actually way ahead of the game, even ahead of California, even ahead of Washington State, Oregon. They're doing so much more related to climate change and reducing transportation emissions, which, by the way, is a huge number of our transportation emissions here in places like California. But the state kind of punts when it comes to its obligations for reducing the emissions. So it's interesting. We'll watch what Colorado does. If they take that money that would usually go to the DOT and push it towards transit, that would be a huge precedent-setting thing that other states could follow. So interesting thing to watch. Emerging project agreements. A new federal program is looking to counter a disconnect in how local projects in different economic sectors can be coordinated locally as they receive federal funding. To maximize the impact of a portfolio of projects that are receiving federal funding, cities like Austin, Texas, Kansas City, Missouri are using a new tool called an Emerging Project Agreement that connects the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Build America Bureau to local project sponsors. This was by Bruce Katz in the Philadelphia Citizen. So basically, the way I understand this and the way that Bruce wrote this in the article with his team of folks is that usually what happens when you get funding is funding comes from the federal government and it goes vertically. So it goes from the federal government to the MPO to local level, or the federal government to a state DOT to the MPO to the local level. It comes from top down. But what happens in local areas is that a lot of these agencies are working together with the water district and the transit agency and the city and everybody else. And that's actually more of a horizontal flow of work that's happening. And so when the federal government gives money from the federal level, it goes down this silo, vertical silo. And what they are actually trying to do is get the vertical and the horizontal to match up a little bit more when they're thinking about a larger aspect of transportation or any other kind of energy project in the city or region. So if you're going to give projects, federal funding, and in Austin, I guess the idea is to connect the big transit project they're doing, the highway project they're doing, the airport project that they're working on as well, into one kind of not mega project, but one coordinated idea, so that when they do give federal funding, there's a lot of coordination that goes on between the three. I think that's really interesting for a number of reasons. And the main one is that basically the thing that happens when all of these projects are connected is that they're kind of disparate in their findings and also their goals and their aspirations. So, in a highway project or a transit project, there's obviously the differences of moving vehicles versus moving people. But what if we had like a singular goal for all these things? Now, I'm not a big fan of the Austin highway expansion. I've said this many times on the show, but at the same time, like, this is actually going to be a good kind of, I don't think this will actually happen in the Austin project, but I think it will be a very good kind of bellwether for other places that want to do things. So things like what's happening in Colorado, where they're actually trying to reduce emissions and they have a baseline that they're trying to get to. I think like if something works out in Austin where they can coordinate some of these projects, or in Kansas City where they're doing some other stuff, which is actually maybe a better example of what I'm thinking of, they might actually be able to, think together to reduce emissions, think together to reduce VMT and transportation, impacts, think together to do a bunch of other things. So the coordination aspect of this is really interesting, and I looked forward to seeing what happens. I know that in Kansas City, they're thinking about a 21-mile rail line. They're thinking about expansion of the streetcar. They're thinking about neighborhood reconnections from an existing a previous highway expansion and environmental safety programs for a watershed. And so those are actually more in line with what I'm thinking, rather than just expanding a highway and then expanding an airport and expanding a transit system. What I'm hoping is that, I hope Austin does this actually, is they would look at like what they need to do in terms of emissions reduction. And then that means they don't actually expand the highway, but I don't think they're going to do that. I think there's like a larger aspect of metropolitan planning that needs to kind of focus on these major partnerships. And it could be, it could be transportation, it could be energy, it could be environmental stewardship, it could be anything from, increasing transit ridership, it could be reducing emissions. All these things are good goals, but I hope that there is something that comes out of these kind of agreements with regions and the federal government that we can learn from, that we can, basically make our planning process better. We'll see if it happens or not, but there's some hope there. And I think this is a really interesting example. So, and also check out this article because it goes really in depth. I didn't go to like even a tenth of the depth that this article goes and how this might work. So I hope folks check that out. How Bogota tried to solve urban traffic. Bogota, Colombia grew from a smaller city of 600,000 people in the 1950s to a bustling metropolis of 11 million. As the city grew, bus rapid transit and bicycles met the transportation needs of the residents, but many are frustrated as the system lagged on expansion, faced financial neglect, and experienced more crowding. A new metro is under construction, but it's also unlikely to solve the biggest problem, the politics of wealthy drivers. This was by Michael Kimmelman in the New York Times. This is a great article on Bogota and the politics of transportation everywhere. Bus rapid transit there is portrayed here in the US as a super popular thing that everybody should replicate, but it's also bogged down in politics like everywhere else. And liberal governments there are wanting a subway and not wanting to maintain or expand the existing system because they see it as the idea of an opposing conservative-leaning government, and which is frustrating because hopefully we learn from the good things that happen, even if it is from a more conservative government. But I think that that's really interesting, and that's kind of what I got out of this piece, is that everything that can be touted as a good policy outcome, and whether that's in Bogota or Paris or Tokyo or wherever else, it's not that everybody in Tokyo or Paris wanted to do this thing, or Bogota for that example. They have a lot of people that didn't want that thing. And so there's a push and pull when it comes to policy, and especially when it comes to transportation. And hopefully we get to a point where we're doing really good transportation policy. But there's always going to be people who are getting frustrated by it because it changes the way that they've always done things, which is driving cars. So I think this is a really good article. I hope folks get a chance to read it. It's a pretty long one, actually. And Michael did a good job of sharing that. There's also another bus article that showed kind of some of the treatments of bus rapid transit, and I thought that the New York Times did a really good job of illustrating that as well. Salt Lake City's downtown success. A report from the University of Toronto found that Salt Lake City, Utah had the strongest pandemic recovery of any downtown in the United States based on unique visitor foot traffic. This strong recovery is caused in part by workers who see being in the office as important to their growth, and by the city's cultural institutions and entertainment that make up a greater part of the city's footprint than many office-dominated places. Last year, 61% of people came downtown for arts and entertainment. This was by Alan Greenblatt in Governing. yeah, there's some lessons here for other cities. Downtowns aren't just for offices. They're for entertainment. They're for hanging out. They're for visiting friends and going out to restaurants and things like that. I think they can offer, basically a central node for people to meet and get together, but also they don't need to be monolithic. And I think that's one of the problems that we've had with US downtowns that's very different from other places around the world, that US downtowns they're tall buildings, but they're also very office centric. And I think that's frustrating for the 9 to 5 being the only focus. And I think it's been frustrating for transportation policy too, because basically commute trips are only 19% of trips. Every other, 80%, 81% of trips are other trips. But it just happens that those 19% of trips happen all at the same time. It's like 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. and all of them happen at the same time. And so we build these massive highways and we build these massive things and we build commuter rail systems that focus on those types of trips. And it doesn't quite work that way. And it's not even, and it's not made up in a way that's actually very equitable or environmentally sustainable, because we can do better if we can spread that out over a long period of time. And I think the pandemic has shown what's possible if we do that. So lots of interesting things to learn from places like Salt Lake City in that realm. Okay, stopping Jakarta from sinking. Jakarta, Indonesia is sinking into the sea as its groundwater is extracted for drinking and the threat of sea level rise increases. The worst hit parts of the city have sunken 16 feet in the last 25 years. Currently, 1 in 3 residents of the megacity use wells to get their fresh drinking water. The city's only hope of keeping the Java Sea at bay is setting up the ability of residents to get drinking water through pipes instead of wells. That task now falls on billionaire whose company has just been awarded the contract to expand access to pipe water. It was actually a noodle billionaire. This was by Cheryl Tiantong Lee and Grace Si Hombing at Bloomberg CityLab. Yeah, really interesting. Basically, Jakarta's sinking. They're actually building a whole new governmental center on another island to take people away from Jakarta. And the idea of, saving people with pipes because they're all taking well water that's lowering the water table and sinking the city as sea level rise comes is really fascinating to me. And basically they're putting all of their marbles in this billionaire who hopefully will give pipe water to everybody so that they're not taking out. But I also wonder where that water comes from. Where is it from? Wells outside of the city? Are they going to take water from other places, or is it from the river? Interested to see what happens and whether they're able to shore up Jakarta. I think over the long term, they're just going to have an issue because of sea level rise. A lot of those places are just kind of on the edge. And if we see 5 to 10 feet of sea level rise, there's going to be a reckoning. And not just there, but in a lot of places. I think that's the manage retreat drumbeat is continuing, and it will get louder as we get further along towards 2050. The European Union looks to ban large U.S. vehicles. The European Union is considering whether to close a loophole that allows large American-style pickup trucks to be sold and operated in Europe. 6,800 oversized trucks were sold in the EU in 2022, and Belgian researchers found that pedestrians or cyclists are 3 times as likely to be killed by a large truck than in a collision with a car. This was by Lucien Mathieu and Transport and Environment, a European journal. Yeah, so Europe has existing crash and safety standards for large vehicles, but there's basically a loophole that allows individual vehicles to be approved individually, including gigantic trucks from the United States. And this is something that creates safety issues, obviously. Obviously, the huge gigantic trucks here in the city of San Francisco, for example. I saw one the other day. It was like basically up to my nose was the license plate. That doesn't need to happen, and nobody needs a truck that big. I saw a Cyber truck at 24th and Church, and I kind of just shook my head at the guy, and he might have sped off, but I couldn't really hear it because it was electric vehicle, which is kind of funny. Might have been a bit grumpy at my head shake. So I think there's a lot to be said about not exporting these massive vehicles outside of the United States, and even kind of starting to regulate them here. But there's also the loophole actually has activists locally in Europe thinking about figuring out how they can actually reduce their size restrictions as well. I mean, there's 255 centimeter width limit to trucks and buses in the EU, and so they're thinking about and the trucks are actually starting, pickup trucks, not like lorries, but pickup trucks are starting to get towards that where they're the size of buses or the size of these lorries, and they don't need that. So they're going to start thinking about figuring out how to regulate that. But I think this actually starts to them down the path towards regulating the size of vehicles a little bit more. So there's more safety for pedestrians and cyclists that are in the cities. Okay, next up. Bus rapid transit and auto-centric land uses. Plans for a drive-through on Colfax Avenue in Denver, where a future bus rapid transit line will run, are causing local urbanists to think deeper about zoning changes that were supposed to support more walkable building forms in certain districts. Existing zoning creates restrictions that prioritize pedestrians but still allow auto-based uses, and a zoning overlay might not fix that problem. This was by Andy Cushion in Denver Urbanism. I think this is something that every city struggles with on major corridors and arterials. The market and developers don't quite catch up to what's going on from a transportation planning standpoint on that corridor right away, and might even build things that are detrimental to the new idea of what that corridor is supposed to be, like a drive-through or a big box store or those types of things. And that makes it more dangerous for the pedestrians that the new transportation policy and construction are supposed to alleviate. So, I think that there's been a lot of discussion about this in a lot of cities that are building light rail lines or bus rapid transit lines, where they're trying to get rid of things like drive-throughs or, like I said, big box stores with huge parking lots that just invite, a lot of driving and a lot of possible choke points with pedestrians and cyclists. And so I think that the design aspect of this is something that needs to be considered when doing a major project. And I think that here in Denver, for example, along this corridor, Colfax, there's a lot to be said about, figuring out a way to create kind of a main street feel for such a large arterial, such that people can actually go back and forth across the street to go shopping. I think that's one of the frustrations that many large arterials push in the United States, is that, once you park on one side, then you feel like you have to drive to the other side because there's really no access. And so it actually stifles the amount of business that can be done by businesses on the street, because some people are going to get in their car and they'll be like, I don't need to go park there, instead of just kind of wandering over, which is what you can do on a more narrow street. And so if they narrow the lanes, narrow the streets, and start to figure out, a little bit more about the pedestrian access, and stop, maybe forming, habits of auto access, there might be actually some, synergy there for the businesses along the corridor. I think that would be the best thing overall for a lot of places in the United States. 2 frameworks for fighting poverty. Alan Ehrenholtz discusses 2 approaches for fighting poverty and wonders which one works better. Does investing in disadvantaged neighborhoods reap rewards with programs like enterprise or opportunity zones, or does moving people to places with more economic opportunity improve outcomes? The place-based investment strategy, he argues, in the end, might be the best way forward, even if it sometimes fails. This was by Alan Ehrenholtz, of course, in Governing Magazine. I always appreciate Alan's work. Yeah, so this is really interesting, thinking about the 2 ways to kind of fight poverty, which is, A, you can invest money in the places that are poverty-stricken or have high poverty rates, or you can move people who are in high poverty areas to other areas. And I think that there's probably some sort of a balance between the 2 that can happen. But Alan argues in the article, he says that maybe the place-based investment strategy might work best. Instead of moving people away from the homes that they know or the places that they know, it might be best actually to invest more, valuable infrastructure or more in those places. And I think, I was actually messaging with a friend today, and we were talking a little bit about Mindy Fullalove's book, Root Shock. And I think that actually points to this issue of people growing up or living in a place for a really long time. They might be in poverty, but they also have really strong ties and networks a lot of times. And so moving people away from the strong ties and networks that they had to be in a high income or a high opportunity area, might actually be detrimental for some folks. And I think that there's something to be said about that. And investing in neighborhoods might actually be more beneficial over the long term than maybe moving people out. I'm not saying I don't think that moving people out to other opportunity areas is a bad idea necessarily. There's just, something about the connections that people make over time with their neighbors, with their friends, with their family members that have always lived in the same place. And so, if you can invest in a place and actually raise up people's standard of living, that would be a valuable way to do it. We know from research that, people moving into areas of high opportunity generally, kind of start to mimic the areas that they're moving into. So there's obviously some, very powerful positive impacts of that. But if you can actually do it by investing in the places where people already are, you might actually get more benefits if people have those connections and those, secondary and primary connections that they've lived with their entire life. So I don't think that there's a wrong or right answer necessarily. I think that there's a way to do both, but it's interesting Alan's approach to this discussion. Indoor air pollution is deadly. Indoor air pollution around the world is responsible for 3.2 million deaths according to the World Health Organization. It primarily affects people in middle and low-income countries where residents have open fires in homes or use fuel for cooking. But in the United States, the most common causes of indoor air pollution are cigarette smoke, radon, particulates from any number of sources, including cooking and building materials. This is by Ana Clara Faria in Salon. Yeah, this is one that's kind of near and dear to me because I noticed that a lot of times in my old apartment when we cooked, pork chop or something like that, it would be really bad, particulate smoke for quite a while. And I don't know if that's because I was cooking it wrong or because maybe we didn't have a really good vent hood or a way to kind of get the particles out of the house, except for maybe opening the windows or opening the front door and the back door to get some flow through. But now we have a vent hood that goes directly outside and brings all those particles out. And actually, I think that actually helps when we're doing things like cleaning the house, when there's a little bit of bleach involved or things like that. We can actually also close off the kitchen and kind of vent all the air that's in there out of the house if there's something like that going on. So I think that that's really important. Also, this kind of points to the electrification of things, electrification of stoves, electrification of interior spaces. I know people like cooking on their stovetops, but actually, those stovetops might be part of a larger issue in terms of particulates if you don't have the appropriate ventilation, right? So there's an issue there. If you don't have the appropriate ventilation, you can't get that air out, those particulates from cooking, but also from some of the burning of the gas that, it still causes some problems. And so there's some issues there. So anyway, I thought this story was interesting. I wanted to share it with folks because I always think about kind of Tracy's class, Built Environment and Public Health, when I think of indoor air pollution, because it was kind of the first place that opened my eyes to it. And so, when Tracy, come on, we got to get you back on the show. We'll get you back on. And really interesting stuff about indoor air pollution. I think it's something that with the electrification of buildings, we'll see less and less of, hopefully, as we get more circulation. And also circulation is really important for fighting disease as well. I think this is the new frontier, just like sewage lines and things were when snow found the cholera outbreak in London. I think that these types of interventions where we clean the air in our buildings are actually going to help out a lot when it comes to viral infections, respiratory diseases, and things like that. So this is a really, kind of tip of the spear thing going on here in the United States and around the world that we should be talking about more. All right, the bonus item. So that was the end of our regular items that were popular the week before. Here's some bonus items that were popular in my mind. I thought they were interesting, and hopefully you do too. The City of Seattle Department of Transportation's Climate Response Plan calls for cycling to double by 2030, but cycling facilities are not being designed to carry the amount of people an increase of that size would require, argues Ryan Packer in The Urbanist. I think that this is a problem that a lot of cities have, actually, where they're like, oh yeah, we're going to double our bicycle riding, or we're going to increase our transit ridership by 50% or whatever it is to get their climate goals. But then they don't actually design the systems to do that. It's like an empty promise on a piece of paper. And so if cycling infrastructure is not enough to get to the numbers that they say they want, they're going to have to work on that. And I think that this is a really good call out by Ryan, because there's a lot of cities that make these claims or, create these plans, but they don't actually do anything to, facilitate that change, especially from a bike facility or a transit facility argument. It's really frustrating, I think, for a lot of people in this space. RTD in Denver says its free fares on transit have reduced driving to the tune of 9 million vehicle miles traveled, but the region's transportation pollution issue continues as so many trips are made by cars and trucks and freight. This was in Colorado Public Radio. Again, Colorado Public Radio helping us out. Yeah, so this is really interesting because I think that transit is known for reducing vehicle trips. It can do that, but it's such a small amount of trips in many, many regions that you don't see the impacts necessarily because there's so many other trips by light vehicles, cars, trucks, vans, those types of things, where that creates so much of the pollution. So in order to reduce our pollution, we're going to need to reduce the amount of trips that we take. It's not going to be easy, but this is something that we definitely need to do because the small amount of transit use that people have now isn't necessarily going to reduce it. Now, electric vehicles will do a certain amount, but still, even with electric vehicles, CARB and others have said that you're still going to have to reduce VMT in order to bring the pollution down. And I think that that's really an important point that we need to keep making, is that, yes, we'll get electric vehicles eventually that will help drivers convert their gas-powered vehicles into electric, and it'll reduce point source pollution. But at the same time, there's still a need to get to where we are 2030. We can't just keep increasing VMT. Rich people owning sports teams have moved away from a simple money-making operation and possibly a labor of love into using the team as a real estate enterprise to generate more money. This includes creating mixed-use retail districts that can generate money year-round, not just the 8 days when teams are playing. This is really interesting from my thoughts because of the way that cities are courting or upset about teams leaving. Recently, obviously, for folks that aren't aware, the Washington, D.C. lost their basketball and their hockey teams from the central city, and they're going to move out of town. And I think this has generated a lot of frustration, especially as that place, Gallery Place, was actually a good spot for those types of sports teams, and they had a lot of activity going on and brought a lot of people into the city. It was actually easy transit access too. It was right on top of a transit station. Basically, these owners think of these teams as the basis for a real estate play, and you're seeing this in the creation of destinations all over the country, where they build a stadium, but then they build like a district around it where it's shopping or it's restaurants or whatever else it is. That's a way for them to make more money. And I think that this is the way that the billionaires are gaming the system. No pun intended. The New York MTA governing board voted to move forward with a $15 decongestion toll for cars, $24 to $36 for trucks entering the city. MTA now will have a period of public comment on the tolling structure, which is expected to create strong opinions. This is Bloomberg CityLab. I'm sure we'll talk about the MTA and decongestion pricing in the future. I don't have much to say about it now, but we'll talk about it in the future, I'm sure. Funeral directors have seen more and more people die unhoused over the last several years. As the gatekeepers of death certificates, they are required to put information on people when they pass. But to help policymakers, some states are asking directors to add another data point, whether a person was unhoused before death. This was in Route 50. So you keep data on this, on people's death, their cause of death, those types of things. The death certificate is the main point of data and information related to that. And now you can tell in some states, if they collect that information, whether people were housed or unhoused, which I think is really important, because I'm sure a lot of folks that are, passing away are unhoused. And if people knew what that number was percentage-wise, and it's increasing or decreasing, they can tell whether they're actually, having an impact on people who are homeless. Beijing has set up a mobility as a service program tied to carbon markets that gives people incentives and rewards like discount transit passes and shopping rewards to choose more green travel options. 20% of participants who primarily have gotten around by car have chosen green options due to the program. The City Fix. Basically, this is really cool. And I think this is interesting that they're tying the carbon markets to what rewards people get and paying people rewards in order to, choose a travel option that is green. It's not forcing them to do it. It's giving them incentive to do it. And I think that that's a really important way going forward. It's interesting because we talked to Paula DePerna, on her book, Pricing the Priceless. And she talked about basically going to China and teaching them, a number of the folks probably are working on this now, how to create carbon markets and what they did in Chicago when she was doing her thing. And I think this is fascinating. This is one of the outcroppings of, I guess, her work. Eventually. And I think that's really fascinating to connect all these dots. I hope that we can figure something out here in the United States that's something similar to this. It feels a lot like a mobility as a service that's tied to a carbon market, basically, where you have access to a number of transportation modes and they have you pick the one that's most green that will give you a reward as well. Interesting. I hope we figure something out similar. And a couple more here. Sometime around 2009, the United States has a large uptick in nighttime pedestrian deaths. In other peer countries such as Australia, Britain, and France, the numbers have slightly ticked down, but no one has a complete answer for why America's deaths are so dramatically up. This was in the New York Times. There's an article also, Emily Badger and folks that wrote this piece, they have a follow-up a couple of days later and talked about some of the reasons why people think that nighttime driving. I mean, I think partially they have the graph that shows when the sun goes down, and so when the sun comes down, there's a certain time of day where the glare is different, and so people are past, are hitting other pedestrians and cyclists at that time of day. There's also, the discussion of 2009 was when the iPhone was invented, and so people are staring at screens a lot more. There's screens in cars, there's screens in vehicles, there's screens all over the place, and so if you're not paying as close attention and there's a pedestrian there, you're likely to collide with them. And there's a whole host of other things as well that might cause this issue. It'll be interesting to talk about it going forward. Hopefully we can do an episode on that at some point in the future, but it's interesting to have them kind of pull this data and share it with everybody and have this discussion that gets larger and larger start. I'm really excited about that discussion, not necessarily that it keeps happening and people keep dying. That's frustrating. Canada is looking to create a catalog of pre-approved housing designs from single-family to mid-rises in order to speed up the construction and approval process. The project, inspired by a post-war housing program, is expected to start in January. This was in Bloomberg CityLab. And finally, the housing crisis in Southern California, as well as the pandemic, have exacerbated already unbearable commute times across the region. People crossing county lines to get to work have increased, and work-from-home opportunities that could ease the pressure are limited to certain higher-income job types. This is in the Los Angeles Times. I was wondering about that. Basically, the housing crisis is causing people to have to move further out to afford housing, but then they have to drive or, basically pay a ton in transportation costs to get back into their work, wherever that might be. And it's actually disconnecting, the haves and the have-nots again, because the haves can actually work from home a lot more, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. And if you have a really good paying job versus some folks who don't have jobs that actually allow them to work from home. And so this exacerbates the transportation issue that's happening, as well as the housing issue too. People can move anywhere. They can outbid people for housing. And then the people who are wealthy, they actually have an easy trip to work. And so they're the ones that are actually driving more and likely to have more emissions. And so there's like this perverse reverse incentive from a climate perspective as well. I found this really interesting. I hope we can expand on this some in the future, and thinking about how the pandemic has actually kind of created another schism in the housing and transportation discourse. Well, we went through so many, and this is going to be our last show before Christmas and the New Year. And I just, there's so many great articles that we always have every week, and there's so many that we could share, and I feel like, I just don't have time to share. So, as I've always said, we have an archive of all the things we've ever shared in our archive on the website. If you're a member of the Overhead Wire newsletter, we have basically 95,000 items tagged since 2013 by topic and city, and it's an amazing knowledge tool. So if folks are interested, sign up for the newsletter and you'll get a taste of the archive and what we can do for you. Hopefully we can revamp it soon so we have more topic pages and things like that, but I'm working on that. But this is where this Monday show comes from, and this is kind of some of the work that we do to pull together information so that people can do better out there in the world at transportation planning, urban planning, at their jobs in advocacy or wherever else. So if you haven't signed up already, please take a bit of time and sign up. And I know not everybody likes newsletters, and it's probably why some of you are actually listening to this show instead, but I appreciate the sign up and supporting our work, as you all do, as you are already doing by listening to the show. So we really appreciate it. Also, this is like our 613th episode, I think, between both shows. And so let's keep that going. Let's keep it going to the new year. And thanks so much for listening and supporting as we come up to Christmas. So our main source of support for the podcast is obviously Patreon. We want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and really do keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without you all supporting on Patreon, and you all supporting, buying the scarves and everything else. But, Patreon supporters are giving us money every month, and we really appreciate that. So go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire, and we've had people sign up again this last week, and I appreciate that. So $2 a month will get you some stickers and a handwritten note, and $10 a month will get you one of our bus-only scarves. I've noticed a number of folks lately have been subscribing on Patreon and then not asking for the rewards. Come on, I'll send you a handwritten note and some stickers. Sign up for the rewards and I'll send them to you. I want to write you a note and say thank you. I really do appreciate it. And then also, if you want a scarf, you can buy a scarf, but also you can get one by being a $10 a month member. We really appreciate that because it comes in every month and it helps us out. Okay, listener questions and comments. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears. Feel free to email us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Puppies and Butterflies is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in other sections. So I hope everybody has a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I know it's been a crazy 2023, and it's about to get crazier in 2024, I think, because of the election and some other things. I really thank you all for listening with us and, coming with us on this journey of learning. And, we'll see you back here next year with more news, information, and fun discussions. I got some ideas for things I want to try, things I want to do in the coming year. And so hopefully we'll get everybody on board and we'll all come be a part of that together. I really appreciate everybody who listens to the show, and finds new people to connect with because of the show, who post on social media, who make sure that they can do better in their communities by learning little tidbits of things that we share. I've heard a couple of folks tell me lately that they've met people through the show, they found new information through the show, and that really helped them do their work or advocate better, and that really warms my heart, because that's kind of what this is here for. It's here for you all to try to figure out how to make places better, and because I this is the way that I know how to do that, and then that's the way that you all know how to do that, and that bringing them together is just amazing, and I can't stop appreciating that. So you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at theoverheadwire.com. You can find me on Mastodon too, The Overhead Wire at sfba.social. You can also find me on Threads at The Overhead Wire. If you like to follow me on Instagram even, I'm on at The Overhead Wire. We share some vacation photos and things like that. From time to time, I'll post some stories about upcoming events and scarves and things like that. So follow me on all the social sites. I'm also on LinkedIn. Connect with me there. So hopefully we can connect in some form or fashion for folks that are listening to the show. I always enjoy talking to folks and reaching out to folks. And if you like the show at one time or still like it and still listen to it, I always like hearing people's favorite show too, because it gives me an idea of what people are listening to and whether the choices that I'm making in show guests and topics are correct. And I think they have been. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at the Overhead Wire this year in 2023. Thanks for our generous Patreons for supporting this week's podcast. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful New Year, a happy Christmas, and we'll see you next year.
Talking Monday.